Krystal, what are you taking a look at?
The birthplace and test lab of neoliberalism just decisively rejected neoliberalism. So this week, voters in Chile were given a direct choice between two very different candidates. On one side was Jose Antonio Cast. You could think of him as a Trump or maybe a Bolsonaro-style candidate. His cultural rhetoric was right-wing populist with calls for law and order and great replacement-style fear-mongering about immigrants. In terms of economics, he actually framed his campaign as a battle to preserve, quote, sacred property rights. And he also went all in on Red Scare anti-communist rhetoric. On the other side was Gabriel Boric, who you might think of as a kind of a Bernie Sanders or Jeremy Corbyn-style social democrat. Boric gained prominence as the leader of a 2011 student protest movement dedicated to fighting high education costs. And like Sanders, he maintains a revolutionary affect, even as his actual agenda is really pretty moderate. He campaigned on some modest tax increases for the rich, reducing the work week from 45 hours to 40 hours, and reforming the country's healthcare and pension systems. Fidel Castro, he is not. Yet, with his campaign pledge to, quote, bury neoliberalism, he is also a significant break from the handmaidens to business and wealth which have governed that country for many long decades. Now, why should you care about what voters in Chile are up to? Well, first of all, as I alluded to before, Chile's history is really significant. As many of you know, the last leftist leader of the nation was toppled by the US government in the name of making sure companies would be able to profit off of their substantial natural resources. We installed the brutal military dictator, Pinochet, who we propped up with money and loans while he and his goons were throwing dissidents out of helicopters and murdering them by the thousands. But US influence has been just as significant in the post-Pinochet era as well. Chile was where we and our affiliated global institutions tested out all of the so-called market reforms, which we came to call neoliberalism. This started under Pinochet with a group of Milton Friedman-trained free market ideologues known as the Chicago Boys, but they continued even after the dictatorship was overthrown. Chile is only now, after mass social upheaval, rewriting their dictator-era constitution. So while the free market radicalism was touted by its adherents as creating an economic miracle, the reality for ordinary Chileans was one of high prices, low wages, and some of the worst inequality in the entire world. In Chile, 80% of people live paycheck to paycheck, getting by on credit and installment payments to purchase basic necessities. It is a remarkable indictment of neoliberalism that even in the country hailed as its greatest success, it has immiserated so many people that they just rejected it wholesale. Another reason you should care, though, is because there are some ways that Chilean politics seem to be mirroring US politics. Look, you always want to be careful about making these comparisons. They have an electoral system that's different from ours, a past and culture that's very different, social and economic conditions which are also very different. Cast is not literally Donald Trump, and Boric is not literally Bernie Sanders. But sometimes international politics do end up being a kind of canary in the coal mine for our own politics. You can think about Trump and Brexit. You can think about the realignments that have moved working class voters to the right and educated elites to the left in nearly every single developed country. There's more domestic parallels, though, than just the prominence of a populist left and rhetorically populist right figure. As in the US, Chile recently experienced a mass historic protest movement, which was brutally suppressed by a militarized police state. So for us, the spark was obviously the brutal murder of George Floyd by a police officer in broad daylight. For Chile, the spark was a hike in the price of public transportation in the capital city of Santiago. And those protests in Chile in October 2019, they were truly extraordinary. What started as a social media-driven phenomenon of high schoolers hopping turnstiles quickly morphed into the largest protest in the history of that nation. 1.2 million people marched through the streets of Santiago. Keep in mind, Chile is only a country of 18 million people, so a huge chunk of the population actually joined the action. And like the George Floyd protest, some of those involved went from protesting to rioting, burning metro stations and blocking streets. The state responded with a brutal police and military crackdown that saw tanks rolling through the streets of Santiago, recalling chilling memories of the Pinochet dictatorship. Just as here, though, the disorder and chaos of the protests opened up a real lane for the right wing to promise a return to law and order and to demonize all protesters as illegitimate actors. That appeal worked really well for the right-wing candidate Cast, up to a point. He surged in the polls and actually led in the first round of voting. But he failed to secure a majority, and that forced a second head-to-head matchup against Boric. In that second round, 1 million more voters turned out, and Boric made huge gains on his original coalition. Cast, meanwhile, was unable to expand beyond his first-round base, leading to a surprisingly lopsided victory for the leftist Boric. In other words, Boric built a broad coalition, while Kast's aggressive culture war politics limited his appeal. There could be some lessons here for a Republican right wing that is enamored with a similar sort of cultural backlash reactionary politics. In Chile, at least, those politics hit a hard ceiling beyond which they struggled to expand. Now, here in the US, it may work well for, say, the low turnout midterms, but may be less effective when a much larger share of the population turns out in the next presidential year. A final reason why you should pay close attention to what happens in Chile is to see if the US is going to actually let them be for once. As the former Spanish content director for Bernie put it, time for the Biden don't coup Gabriel Boric challenge. It's funny because it's kind of true. For the deep state and the wealthy elites who go into a murderous panic the minute that they might not be able to fully exploit every single corner of the world, the Cold War never ended. Just look what they did to Evo Morales in Bolivia, using a fraudulent report about voter fraud to push him out of office, or consider the disgraceful failed attempt to install Juan Guaido in Venezuela. Now listen, you do not have to like Maduro to object to Trump's touting of a U.S. military option for Venezuela, the U.S. government's admitted direct coup talks with rebel officers, and their rush to recognize Guaido based on his extraordinarily dubious claim to the presidency. Chile is one more sign that the world is totally done with neoliberalism. But is neoliberalism done with the world? New leaders like Boric, they could help experiment and chart the course if he is actually allowed to even modestly stray from the prescribed path. Pretty fascinating here, because actually this is an instance where the polls ended up, the ultimate vote ended up being a lot more lopsided. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching.
That's right. Just as a reminder, you can become a premium subscriber today. Watch the full show completely uncut, our reactions to each other's monologues. You get to listen to it, you get to ask us questions, all that good stuff. Link is right there in the description or at breakingpoints.com.
Best of all, great way to say screw you to the mainstream media.